The sun was blazing over the cracked sidewalk as little Stefan stood behind his homemade lemonade stand, the bright yellow sign wobbling slightly in the dry summer wind. His hands, small and sticky from pouring countless cups of his sweet lemon mix, gripped the edge of the wooden table like it was a lifeline. A large glass jug, filled with pale yellow liquid and a few slices of floating lemon, stood in the center next to a pile of white plastic cups behind him. A small red cooler buzzed faintly, struggling to keep the rest of the lemonade cold under the relentless heat. Stefan's t-shirt clung to his back, damp with sweat, his shorts dusty from dragging the table to this corner of the street. People walked by, couples, joggers, moms with strollers, men in suits tapping on their phones. Yet not one of them stopped. Some glanced at him with vague curiosity, others didn't look at all. A few crossed to the other side of the sidewalk without even a glance. He stood there with a forced little smile, his dark eyes watching each passerby with a flicker of hope that would dim with every second they kept walking. "Fresh lemonade, $1, cold and sweet," he called out in his best, brightest voice, trying to keep it upbeat. His voice cracked slightly at the end, betraying how long he'd been repeating the same phrase. No one responded. His throat was dry, but he didn't take a sip. He was saving every cup, hoping to sell them all. He looked at the jar he'd set up for money. 2 quarters and a crumpled dollar bill. That was it. He'd been out here for almost 3 hours, and he'd only sold 1 cup, barely. The old man who'd bought it hadn't said a word, just dropped $1 and walked off sipping without looking back. The rest of the time, Stefan had been invisible. He tried not to let it get to him, but his chest felt heavy, and his lower lip trembled slightly when he thought about the phone in the store window, the one he'd been dreaming about for months. It wasn't a fancy one, not the latest model, just something with a decent camera and a screen that wasn't cracked like his old one. He'd seen it at the electronics shop down the street. $135. That was the price. He had $26 saved up, hidden in an envelope under his mattress back home. Every dollar counted, and yet today felt hopeless. The ice in the cooler was melting. The lemonade was getting warm, and he was starting to feel like giving up. His arms hung by his sides now. He didn't bother calling out anymore. Instead, he watched the people and tried to guess what kind of jobs they had, where they were going, what it would feel like to be noticed. A few kids passed by with their parents, but their eyes were glued to their phones or ice cream cones, and the adults gently tugged them along, ignoring him. He shuffled his feet and looked down at the cracks in the pavement, trying to swallow the lump forming in his throat. He thought about his mom working double shifts at the diner and how he told her he'd try to help by his own phone so she wouldn't have to. He thought about how proud she looked when he said that, how she hugged him tight and packed him a sandwich and told him to be careful in the heat. He didn't want to go home empty-handed. Not again. Not with nothing to show for all the time he spent out here. All the hopes he'd quietly carried with him that today might be different. That someone, just one person, might stop, might care. But nobody did. Time dragged. The sun slid across the sky. His shoulders slumped. He sat down on the little crate behind the stand and rested his chin in his hands, staring at the sidewalk like it might give him an answer. He barely noticed the tall figure approaching from the distance. Not until the sound of footsteps slowed and then stopped right in front of the stand. Stefan didn't look up at first. His eyes were still fixed on the sidewalk, his mind racing with thoughts that only grew heavier with every minute. He kept wondering if maybe his lemonade wasn't sweet enough, or maybe he should have used different cups, or maybe the sign wasn't big enough to catch attention. His fingers nervously played with the hem of his shirt, and his heart sank deeper with the realization that the day was slipping away from him. Then a shadow fell across the table, and Stefan blinked, slowly lifting his gaze. A man stood there, maybe in his 40s, dressed casually in jeans and a dark blue shirt. He wasn't like the others who rushed by with distracted glances. He was just standing still, looking directly at Stefan, not with pity, not with disinterest, but with genuine curiosity. "Hey, kid," the man said, his voice calm and warm. "How much for a cup of lemonade?" Stefan straightened up instinctively, startled but trying to sound confident, even though his voice betrayed his exhaustion. $1, he replied quickly. The man nodded slowly, glanced at the jug, then looked back at Stefan. "All right," he said. "And how much for?" "All of it." Stefan froze. For a moment, he thought he hadn't heard correctly. All of it? No, one had even bought 2 cups at once today. And now, this man was asking for everything? His brain struggled to calculate. He had made about 5 dozen cups, poured maybe 2 or 3 already, but the rest was still there, and he hadn't done the math for a situation like this. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again as he scrambled to think. He looked at the jug, then at the cooler, then back at the man, feeling a strange mix of hope and disbelief growing in his chest. I think. Maybe. $50, he said cautiously, almost questioning himself as he spoke. He expected the man to laugh, or shake his head, or maybe say it was too much. But the man didn't do any of that. Instead, he reached into his back pocket, pulled out a worn leather wallet, flipped it open, and slowly counted out a stack of crisp bills. Stefan's eyes widened as he watched the man peel off 100, then 2, 3, 4, until he had $500 in his hand. Without saying a word, the man placed the stack on the table, right next to the plastic cup. Stefan stared at it in disbelief, his mouth slightly open, unsure if this was real or if the heat had finally started messing with his head. "You keep the lemonade," the man said casually. "I don't need it, but I figured maybe you could use the help." Stefan looked up, eyes wide, his heart pounding in his chest so loud he could hear it in his ears. "Why? Why would you do that?" he asked, barely managing to get the words out. The man smiled, not in a flashy or smug way, but in that kind of smile that felt like it came from a place of deep understanding. "Because I see you trying," he said, "and sometimes that's enough for someone to step in." Stefan's hands were trembling as he slowly reached for the money, still half convinced it might disappear if he touched it. The bills felt cool and smooth in his hand, and the weight of them felt almost unreal. "I'm saving up," Stefan whispered, his voice shaky, "for a new phone. My old one's cracked, and I've been trying to get the money myself." The man nodded, like he already guessed as much. "That's a good goal," he said, "and it looks like you just got a little closer to it." Stefan looked down at the money again, then back at the man. "This is way more than I need," he said softly. "I can give you change," but the man raised his hand gently, stopping him. "You keep it," he said. "Consider it a reward for your effort. You stayed out here, even when nobody stopped. That takes guts." Stefan didn't know what to say. His throat was tight, and he felt something rising in his chest that he hadn't felt all day, relief, joy, and something like hope returning in a rush. He didn't want to cry, but his eyes were starting to sting, and he blinked quickly, trying to hold it together. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice breaking just a little. "I mean it. Thank you so much." The man glanced down at the stand and then at the nearly full jug. "How about this?" he said. "You pack up for today, and I'll walk with you to the store. Let's get you that phone." Stefan stared at him, trying to process the offer. It took a second for his brain to catch up. "You mean now?" The man smiled again. "Why not? No time like the present." Stefan stood up quickly, nearly knocking over the crate behind him. His hands moved clumsily, but quickly as he started gathering up the cups and pouring out the lemonade he no longer needed to save. The sign flapped in the breeze as he pulled it off the table, and he folded it carefully, almost ceremoniously, before tucking it under his arm. As he packed, he kept glancing at the man, as if to make sure he was still there, still real, still waiting. And he was, just standing there with a patient, kind expression, like this was all perfectly normal. When everything was packed up, Stefan slung the cooler's strap over his shoulder and picked up the folded table awkwardly. The man stepped in. "Let me help with that," he said, taking the table from Stefan without waiting for a response. They started walking down the sidewalk together, and for the first time that day, Stefan didn't feel invisible. People still passed them, but now he didn't care. He felt light, like something had lifted from his shoulders. As they walked, the man asked him questions, what kind of phone he wanted, what he liked doing on it, if he liked taking photos or playing games, and Stefan found himself talking more than he had all day, words tumbling out in quick bursts, his excitement spilling over with every step. By the time they reached the electronics store, Stefan's heart was pounding all over again, but this time it wasn't from fear or disappointment, it was from joy. As the glass doors opened and cool air rushed out to meet them, Stefan turned to the man beside him and smiled, his whole face lighting up in a way it hadn't all day. "You're really something," he said quietly. The man chuckled and nodded toward the store. "So are you, kid. Now let's get that phone." Stefan could barely believe the words coming out of his own mouth when he told the man it would be $50 for all the lemonade. He had hesitated, unsure if it was too much, his voice barely above a whisper, but the man didn't flinch or question the amount. Instead, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a thick stack of bills, and calmly counted out 5 crisp $100 bills before placing them gently on the edge of the lemonade stand. Stefan stared at the money as if it might vanish into thin air. He blinked, then blinked again, trying to make sense of what was happening. "Keep the change," the man said with a smile, his voice casual, as though giving away hundreds of dollars was something he did every day. "I don't need the lemonade, but I can see you've been working hard out here. What are you saving up for, kid?" Stefan's breath caught in his throat. The question hung in the air, and for a moment he couldn't speak. His hands were shaking slightly as he touched the bills, the smooth paper feeling surreal under his fingertips. "A phone," he said at last, his voice cracking a little. "I'm saving up for a new phone. Mine's all broken and I wanted to buy it myself, so my mom doesn't have to." He looked up at the man, his eyes full of emotion, shock, disbelief, gratitude. The man's expression softened, and he nodded slowly. "That's a good reason," he said. "Tell you what, how about we go get that phone right now? I've got a little extra time today." Stefan's jaw dropped. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He'd imagined this moment so many times, getting the phone, holding it in his hands, but never like this. Not with a stranger showing up out of nowhere and handing him more money than he'd ever seen in his life. "You really mean it?" he managed to say, his voice barely a whisper. "Right now." The man nodded again. "Right now." Stefan scrambled to pack up his things, his heart pounding with excitement. The heat and the fatigue that had weighed him down all day vanished in an instant. He poured the remaining lemonade out onto the grass, packed the empty cooler, folded the table with hurried hands, and stuffed the sign into his backpack. The man offered to carry the table, and together they walked down the sidewalk toward the electronics store at the corner. Stefan kept glancing up at him, still half expecting him to disappear, still trying to figure out why this was happening. As they walked, the man asked him questions, what kind of phone he wanted, what he liked doing on it, whether he used it mostly for music or pictures or games, and Stefan answered with a kind of enthusiasm that had been missing from his voice all day. "I really want the Galaxy Mini," he said, almost shyly. "It's not the newest one, but it has a good camera, and I can use it for school too. I've been watching it in the shop window for weeks." The man chuckled. "Well, sounds like you've done your research." When they reached the store, the cool blast of air conditioning hit them as the doors slid open. Stefan stepped inside, the fluorescent lights bright against the sleek displays of shiny new phones and gadgets. He walked straight to the corner where the Galaxy Mini was displayed, like he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. His fingers hovered over the glass case, his reflection staring back at him with wide, gleaming eyes. "That's the one," he said softly. "That's the one I want." The man gave a nod, walked over to the counter, and waved over the clerk. "We'll take this one," he said, motioning to the phone. The young employee smiled and unlocked the case, carefully removing the phone and placing it into a small box. Stefan stood frozen, watching every motion as if it were a dream. When the man handed over his card and signed the receipt, Stefan looked up at him, completely overwhelmed. "You really didn't have to do this," he said quietly. "This is more than I ever thought would happen." The man crouched down a little, meeting Stefan at eye level. "Sometimes," he said, "life gives you small moments to make a big difference. Today, this is mine, and maybe one day, you'll get a moment like this too. And you'll know what to do." Stefan didn't know what to say. His chest was tight with emotion, and he had to blink a few times to keep the tears from falling. He clutched the small box in his hands like it was made of gold, the plastic wrap around the phone crinkling softly beneath his fingers. As they left the store together, the sky was starting to fade into late afternoon, the sunlight casting long shadows across the street. Cars passed by, people walked past, but for Stefan, everything else had faded away. He looked up at the man again. "I don't even know your name," he said, realizing it suddenly. The man smiled. "I'm Marcus," he said, holding out his hand. "And you're Stefan, right?" Stefan nodded, shaking his hand with a firm grip that surprised even himself. "I won't forget this," he said. "Ever." Marcus nodded. "I hope you don't. But more than that, I hope you remember how it feels. And you keep believing in yourself, even when nobody stops to notice." They walked together a little longer, back toward the corner where Stefan had started his day. When they reached it, Marcus helped him set the folded table down beside a lamppost, and Stefan turned to face him one last time. "Thank you," he said again, his voice steadier now. "Not just for the phone. For everything." Marcus gave him one last smile. "You did the hard part," he said. "I just showed up at the right time." With that, he turned and walked away, blending into the flow of people and traffic like just another face in the crowd. But for Stefan, Marcus was unforgettable. He looked down at the box in his hands, then up at the sky, a grin spreading slowly across his face. The world felt different now, not because he had a new phone, but because someone had seen him, believed in him, and reminded him that kindness still existed, and that maybe, just maybe, good things really could happen to people who never stopped trying.